Where were you during the explosions?
Well, I had just crossed the finish line, and if you look at, there's two times on my marathon run, so you have to look at really the gun time, which is the time that actually started, but it took me about just over 2 minutes to cross the start line. So if you look at my chip time, it shows that I was about 2 minutes in front of the bombings, but I was actually 15 seconds based upon the gun time of the marathon. So I just crossed the finish line, and my mom and dad were there at the finish line, and they were luckily in the church called the Church of the Finish Line. So I just crossed the finish line, and I was waving to my mom and dad, and everyone was very excited. This is the first time they traveled with me to Boston, and my dad is almost 90 years old, and he was trying to open the window to wave to me, and so we just waved to one another, and he couldn't get the window open. And then all of a sudden, just over my shoulder, there was this huge explosion, and the whole ground shook. And so I looked over my left shoulder, and it just, I mean, it was 10 yards away from me. It was just unbelievable. And from my vantage point on the street, so I just crossed the finish line, but I had stopped right there. And so this was just before the finish lines where the first bomb went off. And so it looked like the whole street was on fire, and there was smoke everywhere, and it was just, I mean, everyone was so shocked initially. And all the race volunteers and the paramedics, because there's a first aid tent just across the finish line, and so they just started rushing toward the explosion. And then a second explosion went off, and it was, people were just panicked, because all of us who had just crossed the finish line had our loved ones at the finish line. You know, if someone had crossed maybe an hour before us, those people would have all been gone from the finish line. You know, most people aren't hanging around waiting for other people. So we all had loved ones, and so there was sort of this confusion and panic, quite frankly, among us about where our loved ones were. So I called my mom and dad, and then the phone service went down because the cell service was shut off right away by the officials. So we had always planned to meet back at the hotel initially, but so I just continued on the shoot, and people, were very helpful. Your medal's over here, your water's over here, and I sort of said in my weakest moments, well, I don't want my medal, I just want my parents. And so eventually I did think twice about my medal, so I actually circled back just a few yards and got my medal. And then the volunteers, were very, they had been trained to just continue on, so they offered me my water and a food bag, and then we went to pick up our bags, our drop bags with our belongings in them. And at that point, there was a rumor that there were more bombs that were going to be detonated, and so they were telling all of us who were in the finish chute to take cover because more bombs were planned to go off. So that was a little bit of a time that we all panicked, and there were several runners that I was with and whom I didn't know, but we just happened to cross the finish line together. So we were all together, and we didn't know where to go. We didn't know, obviously, where the next bombs might be, and fortunately there weren't any more bombs, but we all stuck together. We eventually did go back and get our bags that had been dropped at the start line, that then they transport in buses to the finish line. And then I was really anxious to get back to my hotel. So it felt very safe to be beyond the barricades and out of the official area. The next area on the way back to my hotel was the public garden, and it did feel very safe to be there. That's all an open area. So I kept walking, and I was trying to text my kids, and because they were getting worried, and eventually I made my way back to my hotel, and my parents were already there. They had walked the whole way back to my hotel. So that was the best part of the day, was my reunion with my mom and dad in the hotel. So that's sort of my finish line story, and it was a very sad moment. The hotel where we had stayed, and I'd never stayed in a hotel before in Boston. I usually stay with my cousin who lives there, but the hotel had planned a party for finishers in their lobby. So there were, coffee and bagels and all kinds of fruit in the hotel, and it sort of turned into this crisis watching center where just CNN was on, and they were covering the bombings live, and just no one, it was just disbelief that anyone could ruin a perfectly good, harmless, event where people are doing all kinds of good things, raising money for charities, doing things for their own health or fitness, and then having all these loved ones at your finish line who are supporting you. So it was a very traumatic. We stayed in the hotel lobby for about an hour before going up to our rooms, and it was just quiet. Boston really had just become from an exuberant city celebrating this 117th running of the Boston Marathon to a very quiet, somber place. So that was sort of my experience that day.